Well, Mr. Brown, the obvious question for a writer: when did you figure out that you are going to be a writer? Do you consider yourself as a mature writer
No,
now?
well, I think in all crafts you have to improve as you go along, and I hope I'm improving. And I hope it's funny because I started writing. I wrote my first story at 6 years old.
Really?
I dictated it to my mother. She wrote it down. I drew pictures with it, and we bound it into a book. It was called The Giraffe, the Pig, and the Pants on Fire, and I still have this book in my library next to Inferno, just to remind myself where it all came from. And I just love the creative process. I really enjoy it.
Don't you want to publish it as my first work?
You know what?
It will be fun.
You know what? It's terrible.
Okay.
But you have to start somewhere.
Okay, I like honest people. Well, is that right that you get up early and you start working at 4 a.m.?
That is true.
How is that possible? When do you lie down?
You know what? I sleep about 5 or 6 hours a night, so I go to bed at 10 or 11 and get up at 4. And I just wake up ready to work. I'm very fortunate. I don't need a lot of sleep. I'll get up and I'll work from maybe 4 until noon writing. And then I'll have perhaps, I'll go exercise or play tennis or something. And then in the afternoon I'll do whatever business there is to do.
Can you talk a little bit about your technique? So how do you write? I mean, we are naive. We don't know how a writer works. So do you make these notes or you,
Sure.
you have a room full of notes on the wall?
You know what? If you saw where I worked, you might think I'm insane. There's a lot of notes, a lot of hierarchies and charts to tell me which way things are going. These books, plot-wise, are fairly complicated. There's a lot of characters, a lot of science, a lot of codes, and if I do my job well, there's twists and turns where you're surprised. So before I sat down to write this book, for example, I had a complete outline, and I knew who I wanted you to think was guilty, who was actually guilty, and how I was going to reveal all that. The books are too complicated to just sort of write and hope you get it correct at the end. You won't. You need to have a very specific foundation. And once you have that, writing, for me personally, it's often trial and error. I will write every chapter from a few different points of view to find out which way works best. For every 1 page in Inferno, there are 10 pages I threw out. And that's not an exaggeration. That's just the way I work.
So how many drafts you have before you finalize the novel?
50 maybe. Yeah. I mean, that's counting the fact that before anybody even sees a chapter, I've written it once, twice, 3 times, thrown it out, gone back and tried it a different way. And by the time my first editor reads it, I've looked at it 20 times.
Before you give away your work to the editor for the first time, do you have any trustworthy persons who are showing?
Okay, I don't. Are you married?
Almost.
Okay, well, then I
Going
warn you.
to be soon.
That's actually congratulations. Your wife will be the most honest person in your life. Okay, she'll be the person that is not afraid to tell you when it's not right in all things. My wife is very bright. She's a great reader, a great editor. So she's the first person who reads anything, because I know that no matter what publisher is waiting for the book and needs it tomorrow, if it's not right, she'll tell me.
Great. Where Robert Langdon, the character, I mean, there is always this wide imagination of anybody who is writing or is reading the story, that the writer creates characters from themselves. So how much of Robert Langdon is in you?
Robert Langdon is much cooler than I am. He's much braver than I am. We share an interest in codes and symbols and history and religions of the world. So we share a curiosity, an intellectual curiosity. But his life is much more interesting than mine. And it's funny, I had a woman once ask me a similar question, and I gave a similar answer. And she said, well, that's impossible, because I said Langdon's much smarter than I am. She said, well, that's impossible because everything that he knows that comes out of his mouth, you had to write. So you have to be at least as smart. I said, no, you don't understand. The character will look at a famous painting and just off the cuff say, well, let me tell you about this. You know, just off the top of his head, that took me 5 days to write. That's
Okay.
right. So, you know,
Okay, I understand.
I understand.
So, when the first movie was produced, Da Vinci Code,
Sure.
Still talking about Robert Langdon, Tom Hanks landed in the role. Have you been happy with this decision? Was he the Robert Langdon you had in your head?
Well, no actor is going to be the exact Robert Langdon you have in your head. I mean, Tom Hanks is, so honored to have him play the part. He's, one of the great living actors in history. Very, very talented. He has an intellectual curiosity in real life that translates to his acting. And above that, he's a fantastic individual, a wonderful person, very kind, very humble, very talented. I couldn't be happier to have him in the role.
Do you discuss with him the character? Does he ever ask you that? Okay, was this about or what?
Yeah, a little bit, but at the same time, he has the novel. I mean, he's a consummate reader. He's read the novels many times and he understands the part. He may ask me a little thing here or there, but he's a professional and wants to bring part of himself to the role as well. So I don't think there's an enormous dialogue with an actor of his caliber. He knows what he's doing, and he has 3 or 4 or 5 novels to draw on for a character.
What about Ron Howard? I guess he knows also what he's doing.
Ron seems to know what he's doing. Yeah, that's right. Another very talented, very kind individual who's just such a pleasure to work with. And this new movie it's looking so good. It's looking like a lot of fun.
If we are talking about, the genesis of the films, there are lots of franchises which are going on now in the cinemas. The superhero, the Marvel things, the vampires, I don't know. You can.
They're all geared for kids.
Yeah, the list is endless.
Yeah.
So I think one point is this is great that we have a franchise with a scientist on. And also these films and these novels at some level are educating people. So when do you write a novel, or when you consult the films? How important is that this basic fact should stay on board?
The what stays on board?
The facts, this historical facts.
Of course it's important, and Ron Howard is somebody who is making these movies because he likes the books, and so he is going to stay true to the books. At the same time, these books are fiction, movies are fiction. Robert Langdon doesn't exist. Yes, he's in Florence, which really exists. Yes, the Hall of 500 exists, and the painting Cherkatrova exists, and these fictional characters are interacting with real artwork and real history. There may be moments that you say there's a hallway on the left when there isn't because you need your actor to get out of the scene quickly. But those are small things. The true all the important stuff, the ideas, the ambience of the time, all of that is very respected and well tended.
When you write a book, how do you find the balance between the fiction and non-fiction?
Well, just as I just said, generally the non-fiction is the history, the documents, the locations, the architecture, the art, what's happening in a certain time period. The fiction is all of the characters that are interacting with that real world, some of their ideas about the real world. With the Da Vinci Code, people say, well, you said this. I said, no, a character said that. You have to understand the difference between an author saying this is the way it is and one of his characters saying, well, what if this were true? And somebody else saying, well, what if this were true? So for me, writing is a great way to create dialogue where one character can give one point of view that you may identify with, and another character gives another point of view that I may identify with, and we meet for coffee, and we now have a dialogue. You know your point of view, and I know mine, because these characters have sort of primed the pump a little bit.
When you are working on a novel, for example, when you worked on Angels and Demons, which is set up in Vatican, so you went there. and you researched and you visited the tunnel, and I did my homework. So were there anybody who said suspiciously that what are you doing here? So what are you going to?
I think
what theory am I going to make? Huh?
I was very fortunate in writing Angels and Demons to have been given some access. I don't know if I would be given the same access today. I kind of doubt it. But I mean, I was surprised with all the controversy about my books. I grew up in a family where I could ask questions about religion. Mm-hmm. And I feel that religion really, I've said this before, has one enemy, and that is apathy. People just deciding they don't really care about religion. These books, I hope, ask difficult questions and make people think about religion, think about why they believe what they believe. And in doing that, their faith oftentimes is strengthened, or at least they come to understand it better. So I don't really see these books as the devil. I mean, there are people in the church who will, tell me I'm off base, or that I'm telling lies, or whatever things they want to tell me. But I've also had a lot of wonderful communication, especially with nuns, Catholic nuns, especially after Da Vinci Code. They just said, thank you for realizing the sacred feminine, this idea that we as nuns have given our lives to Jesus Christ, and yet we're still second-class citizens in our own church. We can't be priests, we can't give communion, we can't, and thank you for pointing that out. So, there's two sides to every equation.
In Inferno, the base is Dante's world. When did you read first Dante? How did you meet Dante?
Yeah, in high school, I took an Italian class, and we read Dante's Inferno in a very watered down, an easy version of Italian. So it was to learn Italian, but we were reading a classic, but in a slightly. And I remember thinking, even not understanding it very well, how modern this vision of hell seemed. I mean, it was written in the 1300s. I mean, it seemed very modern. So in college, I read it again. I've read it in many, many translations. And because I write so much about religion, I've known for quite a while that Dante's vision of hell is the vision of hell that we now have in the modern world. The Bible doesn't say much about hell. If you read the Bible, it gives a small, refers to some underworld and fire and brimstone, but that's about it. You've got Greek mythology that starts to create a little bit of architecture for hell, but it wasn't until Dante that we had this incredibly sort of specific, codified, vivid picture of hell, which we all now have internalized, and the church uses and says, well, that's where you're going if you don't listen to me. And that was all Dante's. So I became fascinated with this idea of writing about Dante's Inferno. And it took me a while to figure out how to do it. So this is the the product of that.
Yeah. Well, and Inferno is special in the way that the ending is different. We don't want to spoil anything, but in the previous books, the world is saved and that's it.
Yeah.
Now, in this one is a little bit more pessimistic, and we can say that. So what happened? Are you getting older or what?
I don't know. That's right. I had a bad day when I finished the book. I don't know. I don't know if it's pessimistic. I think it's realistic. I think that the world is complicated. Our problems are complicated, and there's no knight in armor who rides in and saves the day for us. The villain / hero of this book tries, and all that really happens is we don't know the outcome. We're not sure if it worked, if it didn't work. So I don't know if it's pessimistic, but I do think it's realistic. I think there's, in movies and books, you often have, the hero who goes through all of these trials and tribulations, and with 3 seconds left, cuts the wire and the bomb stops its countdown, and the world is saved. Oh, phew. That's fun. It's not very realistic. And I think this is a much more realistic ending. You're not sure what the solution is going to be.
Is there going to be a next Robert Langdon novel? Of course, right?
I am well into a new book, so it's going to take some time, but I am entrenched in it. It is being written.
Well, if I'm looking at the movies, I found out that you have producer's credit in the first two. What does that mean?
What does that mean? It means that,
we are naive. We don't know anything.
I'm not sure I know what that means, but I think it means that if I want to, I have the right to engage in a dialogue on substantive matters with people like Ron Howard about my vision for the movie and that sort of thing. The reality is I'm very fortunate to work with a guy like Ron Howard, who, to my taste, really understands these books, understands the heartbeat of the book, the spine of the book, and protects those. And so my job as a producer is to come and watch them make magic. Now and then I'll jump in and say something, but very rarely.
We thought this cannot happen, right?
No. I'm not gonna tell Ron Howard how to make a movie. I'm not gonna tell Tom Hanks how to act. I write books. I don't know the movie world. These guys are the pros, and I sort of stand back and let them do their thing.
We heard the stories recently about some writers, not you, of course, who thinks that they can do everything on the film, and they are the film getting adapted for a film.
I think it's important as a writer, if you're going to have your books adapted, it's important to understand that it's an entirely different telling of your book. It's not like they're taking your book and somehow photocopying it into a movie. It's important to understand that the book is going to go through a filter. A lot of the story has to fall away, just or else the movie would be 20 hours long. You're going to have the interpretation of the screenwriter, of the director, of an actor who's interpreting lines that you wrote. Suddenly it's a collaboration. A novel is a singular work by a singular person. You sit down and when I'm writing a book, I'm the master of my universe. Whatever I want, I can put in that book. And when they get turned into movies, well, there's a lot of people working on it. And there are authors who get very defensive and say, you can't take that out. I choose to go the other way, and I have the luxury of going the other way because I'm working with very good people. I choose to read a screenplay and say, oh, that's interesting. Look what they did here. That's sort of a nice way to solve that problem. Or, oh, wow, they added this little bit. That was kind of clever. Rather than sort of imagining that this is the word the word from on high, it's a translation.
There is always a debate about this. Would you consider a screenplay for a movie as literature? Can be talked about as a piece of work?
Literature, I think, is meant to be read. So from that standpoint, I would not consider a screenplay literature. Just because you don't go and buy a screenplay and read it. Literature is meant to be consumed by a reader. A screenplay is the blueprint by which you create a film. I do read screenplays, but I picture the movie. I think that's the way you're supposed to read a screenplay. So from that standpoint, I'm not sure I'd call it literature.
Mm-hmm. Is that right, that for the Lost Symbol, you should have been involved writing the screenplay?
Oh, I don't know if I should have. I mean, The Lost Symbol's a tough movie to make for a whole lot of reasons. I suspect we'll still make it.
Really?
There's a number of different scripts. I've written some other people have written some, we've collaborated on some. It's a difficult movie to make. And I think if you look closely at that book, it was a difficult book to write. It's the book that took me the longest. It took me 6 years.
Really?
A lot of research. And the difference with it, if you look at Angels and Demons, there's a ticking bomb in the Vatican. You have this built-in tension. Mm-hmm. In Inferno, for anybody who's read it, you have also a ticking clock. In The Lost Symbol, you don't really have that. It's a book about ancient mysteries and the power of mysticism, the power of the human mind. It's kind of this foggy world where from a movie standpoint, it's hard to grab onto. So we're working on that. So, and also the villain is really a very prominent character in The Lost Symbol. And in a movie, you need your hero to be the most prominent character. So there's some of that going on too. I think we'll get there.
But as far as I know, you consider villains also heroes, right?
Certainly in Inferno, I love the argument where people say, is he a villain or a hero? I say, well, the fact that you asked me that means I did my job well.
Because what would be the difference between a hero or not hero?
Well,
Can you?
It's a point of view. It's your ethical framework, and you look at, they say, one person's terrorist is another one's religious martyr or hero. It depends on what side of the cause you're on. Someone who is willing to die for his cause. If you share his cause, he's your hero. If you don't share his cause, the person's a terrorist, or somebody who's battling you. So it's all point of view. That's the difference in heroes and villains. I like the villains who do the wrong thing for the right reason. So you can identify with their ethics. You can identify with somebody who says, I think overpopulation is a problem. And you can say, well, I do too. And then the villain says, and this is what I'm going to do about it. And that's when you go like, whoa, hold on, I'm not sure we can do that. And that's what makes that sort of gray area between right and wrong, that's what makes for interesting villains. You don't want villains who woke, they just have evil DNA and they woke up in a bad mood. That's not very interesting.
I felt some resemblance, for example, with James Bond films, which are usually the villains. There are lots of villains who want to destroy the world because they want to start new. I mean, with this, with the overpopulation has been a problem for decades. So that's interesting that you connected this to Dante's world. So what was the idea to bring this letter with that?
That's funny. That's a good question. If you think about my books, you'll see that they all have the very old and the very new at the same time. You've got Vatican and antimatter fused together. You've got noetic science and the Freemasons and their history fused together. And in this book, you have Dante's Inferno and genetic engineering, overpopulation, all this sort of crazy stuff fused together. The idea to unite those really came out of a very simple, one of those eureka moments when you're out for a walk and you say, oh, that's how I'm going to do it. And I was wondering, how do I relate Dante to the modern world? And the idea was create a character who sees Dante's Inferno not as history, but as prophecy. So you read Dante's Inferno and say, oh my God, Dante was warning us. This hell that he's painting this picture of with all of these writhing bodies, starving and all, he's saying that's what the future's going to be. I mean, it may be a crazed villain who's reading the book that way, but he reads that picture as prophecy and immediately says, I've got to do something about it. And that was how you link Dante to the modern world. And without that idea, I couldn't have written the book.
What about yourself? How do you see history and works of literature as a past, as a present, or as a future?
All of the above. I mean, it's the wonderful thing about literature is that it is, depending on what you're reading, it is a window into the past, and it also is a window to the future. It's the window of what we could be, for better or worse. I mean, depending on who you're reading, it could be utopian or it could be apocalyptic, depending on whose vision you're reading. I don't think literature is going anywhere. I know the book business is in flux, but all businesses are in flux, just trying to find the new way to exist and coexist with technology. But literature's not going anywhere.
Since you deal with lots of religions, facts, stories, legends, have you ever been tempted that you want to believe in something? Or what do you believe in?
I think we all want to believe in something. And I think that is I'm going to dodge your question very carefully now. Just full disclosure. How do I say this? I think the origin, this is my own interpretation, the origin of conspiracy theory, religion, is the same place. And that is that none of us we don't like to believe that life is random. We like to believe that someone is driving the bus, that there's some control, that everything that happens, especially bad things, have a cause, that they're not just random. I remember as a child, one of my good friends at 9 years old died. And we went to the church service, the funeral, and the priest said this was part of God's plan. And I felt better to know that, okay, so there was a reason for this. I didn't like to think it was random. And of course later, about a week later, I got mad. I was like, what kind of God has a plan to kill a 9-year-old child? I don't understand that. And I think a lot of people have that feeling. You want to believe that God is controlling things and that there's a reason, but at the same time, when bad things happen, you say, well, that's not a very nice God. So it's a real paradox for the human mind to be logical and want to question things we don't understand, but simultaneously to need a higher power to get through life. And so that's another one of those gray areas that I like to write in.
Haven't you ever feel frustrated when you hear those kind of sentences, for example, like ignorance is bliss?
Yeah, I think we all throw out crazy sentences like that without thinking too hard about them. That's an interesting question. I mean, ignorance is bliss is actually statistically, it's a quite accurate statement. The more you know, the more likely you are to be miserable. So the fact that I'm a pretty happy person lets me know I have a lot to learn.
That's cool. Now you're here in Budapest, in the Hungarian capital, so we are thinking that maybe what kind of a Hungarian literature you have read in the past. Where do you go to the city? Do you visit any tunnels?
I can't possibly tell you that. How could I tell you that?
Yeah, I'm just asking.
It's all a secret. Every place I go, all the research I do is always a secret. And I go to many countries. I just got back from India and the United Arab Emirates, and so now everybody's convinced I'm writing a book set in Dubai and New Delhi or something. Probably not.
Probably not. Okay, then as Dan Brown, as a person, as a man, so how do you see this city? Because an example, I mean, Inferno is shot here. I'm pretty sure that Budapest will act different cities
sure.
in the film. For example, there was this film by Steven Spielberg, Munich, where we were really not sure that which corner of the Andrássy Street is which city. Is it Munich? Is it Paris? Is it Amsterdam? Is it London? So Budapest is a city with lots of faces. So,
yes.
So as a free person, as a free man, that now you are here. How do you see the city?
Well, I've been here 24 hours. It's absolutely spectacular. It's so beautiful. The thing I noticed immediately was that the architecture, it's a mosaic, it's a patchwork. If you go to Prague, for example, it looks like it was all from one time period. And here in Budapest, you have, a building that, is clearly of one style, and then right next to it is something newer, or something from, from the communist era, or something from, it's a patchwork, which for me, I love. I mean, I find it fascinating that you're right, it has many faces. It sort of depends where you look as to what you see. And I don't know, this idea of an urban center being a mixing pot of culture and history. I mean, you taste that here, you really do. So for me, it's sort of one of my favorite places favorite kinds of places to be. That's a melting pot with all sorts of different flavors.
If I have one silly question for the end, you're an American writer, right? You write about history, mostly European culture and world culture. Isn't that far-fetched a little bit from an American?
Well, first of all, that's a fair question. But I wrote a book about the National Security Agency. I wrote a book about NASA. I wrote a book about Washington, D.C. There's 3 books about America, and I've written 4 books about Europe.
We are leading.
Pardon me?
We are leading.
You're leading, and actually I think probably you'll be leading even further when this new one's done, but that's right, there's a little hint. You know what, I think as a writer you need to write what you're passionate about, and I've always been fascinated with European history, European art, and you have to remember that Americans are Europeans. I mean, we're your, ugly stepson. We're young, we're sort of confused, we're trying to find our way, but our history is your history. And so it's not, if you're looking at American history, I'm just going farther back into the world that Americans came from.
I deal with films. I've read in one of the interviews that you read Exorcist when you were a kid.
Oh, jeez.
Have you seen the film?
Yes. It's the last scary movie I ever saw. I mean, honestly, the last horror movie I ever saw was The Exorcist. I was in 9th grade, which means I was 14 or 15, and it scared me so badly that on the way home, I rode my bike home, and it was late at night, and I have to pass a church, and I just was so terrified that I took a wrong turn and hit a chain link fence and had a really bad bike accident that night.
Ouch.
So there was a lot of negative reinforcement from that film. So I don't. My wife loves horror movies, and she knows that she can only see them when I'm away, because I won't let them be on our television, or I won't go to the movies and see them.
You know that some spiritual people claim that there is a devil inside the celluloid.
There may be. Who knows? Probably not. That's right.